hard to believe, but we're quickly approaching the first anniversary of the attack on our Capitol. And the January 6th Commission is gearing up for a busy 2022 with plans for public hearings and an initial report released as soon as this summer. But before then, the committee is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to deny former President Trump's request to shield his records from House investigators. Some of the documents in dispute are from the day of the insurrection, White House visitor logs, call logs, as well as handwritten notes from former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Now, joining me now is former Assistant Special Watergate Prosecutor Nick Akerman. Nick, all right, thank you so much for joining me. A lot to get to here. The Supreme Court famously ruled against Richard Nixon during Watergate and ordered him to hand over tape recordings and other subpoenaed materials. We know in the ongoing litigation between former President Trump and the committee, Trump has lost twice now in federal court, and there's been a big debate. Will the Supreme Court even take up this case? If they do, what will they rule? How do you see this playing out over the next couple of weeks and months?
Well, you're right. There are two courts already, lower courts, the District Court and the Circuit Court of Appeals in New York, that have basically issued very extensive opinions turning Trump down on the issues that he's raised. But ultimately, there are really two issues at play here. One is executive privilege. Trump is claiming that he has the right to assert executive privilege over the documents on January 6th. The problem with that argument is that the Supreme Court has already spoken to executive privilege back in 1974 when they ordered Nixon to produce his tapes to our office. And basically, executive privilege is a privilege that belongs to the government, to the republic. It doesn't belong to the individual. It's not like the privilege to not incriminate yourself under the Fifth Amendment, which is an individual privilege. And Joe Biden, the president, current president, has already determined in a very extensive writing that these documents do not come within executive privilege. Which the Supreme Court has basically limited to diplomatic, military, and national security matters. It certainly doesn't cover a plot against the government to overthrow its normal processes. So it's very unlikely that Trump is going to succeed on that. Both opinions, the lower court opinions, basically pointed out that in the face of Joe Biden's very detailed analysis as to why executive privilege does not apply, Trump has provided absolutely zero facts to explain why it does apply. So it's very unlikely that that issue is really going to go anywhere. The other issue has to do with the legislative purpose of the committee's investigation. Trump is claiming that there is no valid legislative purpose, and both of the lower courts have pointed out that the committee has the right to investigate an activity that has probably been the worst attack on our government since the Civil War. So certainly there's a legislative purpose there to prevent this kind of activity from happening again and also securing the Capitol. You also have Trump making a last-minute submission to the Supreme Court, pointing out that the chairman of the committee referenced possibly referring Donald Trump for prosecution to the Department of Justice. Now, that doesn't detract from the overriding legislative purpose here, and it's not unusual. It's pretty much standard practice if a congressional committee finds that they believe a crime has been committed to refer that to the Department of Justice, which is the agency that has the ultimate authority to determine whether or not a prosecution is going to take place.
Yes.
So when you take those two issues together, the executive privilege and the legislative purpose, and the fact that both courts have really extensively ruled on that, by all rights, the Supreme Court should just deny the appeal and leave it at that. Now, there's no guarantee that'll happen, but in the normal course, that is what should happen in this circumstance.
Well, we know we're not always seeing things play out normally here, but a lot riding on that litigation, certainly. But earlier this week, the chairman of the House Select Committee, Benny Thompson, told our own Jim Acosta that a key part of this investigation has to do with phone calls made to a, quote, war room at the Willard Hotel where allies to the former president, like Steve Bannon, were gathered in the lead up to January 6th. So based on your experience as an investigator, what kind of questions should the committee be asking about those phone calls?
Well, I think they want to know the content of the calls. They're clearly going to get phone records that are going to show what calls were made, how long they were, took place. But the real key is learning what the content was. and whether or not they can get a witness in there that can actually explain what was said. Now, with respect to Donald Trump, the big issue is, did he know and did he encourage the violence in order to stop the vote counting in Congress, in order to get the states to come back with alternate electorates so that he could pull off this coup? And the question is, did he know of the violence? Did he encourage the violence? And that all plays in again to the committee chairman's notion that they may refer this to the Department of Justice for prosecution, because the only way you could prosecute Donald Trump is if you can show that he obstructed Congress and had a corrupt intent. And corrupt intent certainly would encompass encouraging violence to stop that vote. So that is why that is so crucial. And it's also crucial to get some witnesses that can tell you what happened, or documents that can show Donald Trump's state of mind during that period of time.
Well, we know they've spoken with approximately 300 people behind closed doors. There could potentially be some public hearings, though none have been scheduled. Well, we know with the Watergate hearings, obviously they had that very famous John Dean moment that captivated a nation. Let's take a look at it real quick.
I began by telling the president that there was a cancer growing on the presidency, and that if the cancer was not removed, the president himself would be killed by it.
So really quickly, do you see any potential John Deans in Trump's orbit?
Oh, I think there's lots of possibilities. I mean, Donald Trump had contact with a number of people prior to January 6th and during the insurrection. And the question is, when you've got 300 or 400 witnesses, somebody had to have overheard something. Somebody had to see something. There's going to be documents that were created during that period of time. So we don't know if there's going to be that John Dean moment, but it could very well happen. And certainly the committee's investigation has put across a very wide net. And so the question is somebody going to really, come forward? And that could be in Vice President Pence's camp, somebody who is knowledgeable about what Donald Trump was telling Vice President Pence.
Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
And Archbishop Desmond Tutu was laid to rest in South Africa today. The funeral service wraps up a week of events honoring the Nobel Prize-winning activist who fought to end apartheid. It was a simple service with a trimmed guest list to meet COVID regulations.